Hello there, and welcome to part 2 of exploring the threads, the different themes that lead to the synergy that is adulthood. And the first thing that I want to do is explore the difference between the adult self and the adult ego. So this may be tricky, and I say that because I didn't know that there was a difference between the self and the ego until I first tried psychedelics, MDMA, and mushrooms in a therapeutic setting when I was roughly 40 years old. And so for 40 years, I had no idea that the self and the ego wasn't just language, basically synonym. And not only that, but I wouldn't know what I was talking about here if I listened to this, which means that there's a little bit of a challenge, because there's going to be some of you listening to this who have not had a visceral experience of self. So I'll talk about it, and then I will encourage you to do extensive due diligence on a very safe therapeutic protocol for psychedelics if you haven't had that experience already. And I would just as a caveat say that I thought I had done some due diligence, and the greatest trauma and pain of my life actually resulted from therapeutic abuse under the influence of psychedelics. And so, I don't want to just throw that out there as a casual throw-off, since the psychedelic camps generally bifurcate into, this is the most amazing thing since the invention of fire, and the whole world would be saved if everyone took psychedelics, and these are, evil, horrible compounds that are satanic and ruin your health, destroy your brain, and have zero benefit. And the truth is actually everything in the middle. And so the difference between a bad outcome and a good outcome with any technology, whether it's computers, a hammer, an explosive, or psychedelics, is the set and setting and the skill with which it is applied. I do think that dynamite is a good analogy for psychedelics, and so dose is very important. And does dynamite help clear a dam that allows water to flow and for example, if the dam is blocking water from a desert, then the dam bursting with dynamite is going to revitalize the desert. If the dam is protecting a housing development, then it's going to destroy thousands and thousands of homes. And so it's contextual. And you can kill yourself with poor application of dynamite, and you can save lives. It's all contextual, but psychedelics are incredibly dynamic technologies within the psyche. And so if you treat them with that respect, then well worth it. Meaning, I think that despite 7 years of PTSD and trauma, if that's the only way I could have learned what I learned, possibly worth it. Certainly necessary. We all do our best, but it would have been great to have taken another 3 weeks to a month, maybe even 3 months, and just been a little bit more patient and found a truly competent guide, and read and learned from the camp that talks about bad trips and what can go wrong, which isn't as common, in the, I read 2 books on psychedelics, and they were both, didn't share anything wrong about them, and, talking about how wonderful they were. And so what you want to do to balance that out is actually read under the subject of bad trips and ask GPT what's everything that could go wrong and how to minimize it. The truth is in between. So with that said, the difference between the ego adult and the self-adult is that the self-adult is what I would call pure awareness or presence. And it's not as simple as the witness, because the critic is a witness, for example. The Buddhism will talk about witness energy. You need to find the witness. But there are many witnesses that are not the self. The child is a witness. The adolescent is a witness. The archetypal energies all have a witnessing element, and that's not the self. The ego has a witnessing function that is from the perspective of a given persona, a given identity within the ego. So the child usually has an identity that includes the victim, because a child is a victim of everything that happens in the world, positively and negatively. It's at the effect. It does not have agency. Whether the child lives or dies, you can't tell a 2-year-old, take responsibility for your life. For one, they don't even know what those words mean. And if they are parented well, they will live. If they are parented poorly, they will die, i.e. not given any food. And so, so each persona has a slice of the witness, a certain point of view that witnesses the world through that point of view. Then there's a secondary witness, and this would be called perhaps the Buddha witness, who witnesses the witness. So the child says, I didn't do it. It's not my fault. They did it. Why do I have, why am I unlovable or whatever? And that's the child's point of view. It's completely valid. And it's witnessed when we develop a little bit maturity. The child itself does not have a witness of itself. But as we grow older and our inner child still has and speaks in the same way, there is a capacity that we can develop to both feel that and at the same time witness it. And we can say, yes, I witnessed that, and that is true from a certain point of view. And I, the witness, am more than that one point of view. And this is the ego witness. And in order to have a witness of a witness suggests we're at least moving in the direction of the ego adult. Now, it could be the ego adolescent, right? So it's suggestive, it's moving in that direction. But, the child could say something, and the adolescent inside of us could witness that and say, oh, that's so dumb, I hate myself. So that's the adolescent witnessing the child. and criticizing the child. It's witnessing and it's criticizing. So we're not yet into adult territory. And so this brings me into an awareness of what it means to be an ego adult, right? And by ego, what I mean is identity, right? An identity is a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that I identify with. So the identity is the attachment to it. So the ego is the I that says, this is me, that's my thought. Right? So in ego territory, there's always an I. There can be several. Like there can be a parent, an adolescent, and a child. If we are old enough to experience some sense of adulthood, we have those three voices within us minimum. Right? We have our inner child, we have our inner adolescent, we have perhaps an adult, right? Because becoming an adult is not chronologically guaranteed. Like there's lots of 50-year-olds who are still psychological children and adolescents. So it does not suggest that we are an adult just because we're a certain age. But if we're 5 years old, we're not an adult, right? So up to a point, age is a useful reference and limiter. So if we have the adult ego, an I, that witnesses the adolescent and the child, right? Now we have three I's, right? We have the child I don't like this, it's their fault. We have the adolescent I criticizing the child and also criticizing itself and criticizing the rest of the world. That's what adolescents do. But then we have the adult I, both I, but also the eye, right? The lens through which. And we know that we're in adult ego territory when the ego is seeking to understand and respond in a way that serves, that provides for the child and the adolescent, right? So the adult is the one that responds, that takes responsibility, that owns responsibility, and does so in a way that serves the circle, the inner child, the inner adolescent, the trauma, the inner mother, right? That serves the community, that serves the circle. That's the ego in an adult state. And the adult's job and the adult's competency is determined by how well in a given situation it balances the needs of the circle, inside and out, which are connected. Meaning if you're the last human alive, your job is much harder than if you are living in a loving, adult, prosperous group of 100,000. Your odds of survival are way higher. So to be a good adult for one's inner parts includes maintaining and supporting a good relationship with the rest of the species. So that's the adult's job, is to serve all of the parts inside and out that cannot serve themselves, so as to maintain a cohesive unity. Because when the inner child and the outer child is cared for, right, it is willing to participate in the circle in a way that allows the cycle of the species to continue. When the adolescent is honored, is respected, is listened to, it is willing and able to participate in a way that perpetuates the life, that perpetuates the species. And so the adult's job is really one of service. You're in an adult state if your question is, how can I take care of all the different parts of me? And how can I take care of my relationship with all of the parts of the world around me to create grace, to create maximum well-being? And if that's your goal, then you can measure your competency as an adult by how well you do that. Right? If you don't know what gunpowder is and you light a match next to it and it blows off a hand, you didn't do a very good job. The child in you is traumatized. The adolescent in you is angry and hates the world. What else have they, at any moment now that you're going to blow off the other hand, because you realize there weren't enough adults in the environment to prepare you. You don't know how to deal with life. And so there's a very angry, distrusting adolescent, and your job is to continue to listen. You're absolutely right. I didn't know what powder is. I did light a match to it. You're absolutely right. How can I learn from that? Right? So it's the adult's job to own the ability to respond in a way that improves things. That's what the child and the adolescent trusts. So this is the adult ego I. Right? So basically, you can ask yourself, how much of my time am I behaving like a good parent towards myself and the people and the world around me? Now, that includes the relationship with nature. If I start a forest fire without wondering whether my own house will get burnt down, it's not a very competent relationship with nature. If I pollute the river with poison and then catch fish that are poisoned and eat them, not a very good relationship, right? So the measure of the competency of the adult is how well, how scientifically, how competently you actually foster well-being in all of the relationships inside and out. Whether you know you are an adult, because there's two aspects of ego adulthood. One is knowledge, education, skill, competency. And the other is a mindset. Because the adolescent and the child are self-centered, right? Child wants his ice cream. You say, but grandma has to be picked up from the hospital. I don't care. I want my ice cream. Right? So you're a child. Whether you're 50 years old or 1 year old, you're a child. This is the thing that we have to do. We have to plant the wheat. We have to water the wheat. We have to weed the fields so that we can have bread so that our family grows. I don't want to do that. I don't want to be a farmer. I don't want to have to take care of that. Someone else can do that. I want to watch and play video games. We're dealing with a child. We're dealing with an adolescent. We're not dealing with an adult, right? So the adult is the one that takes responsibility. Their ability to respond, their willingness to respond, to create well-being for the group, inside and out. So you can have a very ethical and mature adult that has no knowledge. You arrive in a new country, I didn't know that there were floods, and so I didn't prepare. You have an incompetent adult. Or you can have a very competent adolescent. I know there's floods, I just don't care. It's not my problem, that's the neighbors, right? But of course, when the neighbors understand that you are sociopathic and that even when they're in need, you don't help them, the relationship is severed. And there will be a time when you break your leg, etc., and you have nothing because you did not maintain the field, you did not tend the circle. You did not plant the crops, you didn't water the crops, so there are no crops to harvest, right? And so even if you do it out of fear, the adult has a mixture of this is what could go wrong and this is what could go right. And it's my job to see that things are always moving in a generally positive direction. Competency and maturity are the two faces of adulthood. Now you could flip that into the inner masculine and the inner feminine. Right? The inner feminine, you could say, is the part of the adult that cares for the circle inside and out. The inner mother instinct. And then the inner masculine is the one that says, okay, if I'm going to care for these kids, I've got to learn how to build a house. I've got to learn how to make money. I've got to learn how to save the money. I've got to learn what banks are trustworthy and what banks are not trustworthy. I've got to learn which politicians to vote for, right? So there's research, there's discipline, there's skill building, and there's practice, and there's suffering in adulthood, right? It's not just I'm going to eat candy and I'm going to eat more candy and I'm not going to brush my teeth and I'm not going to apologize and so I'm going to let a good relationship be destroyed because my feelings were hurt and I don't care about anyone else, right? That's the child, that's the adolescent, but of course the species would collapse with that level of maturity, right? There's so much more potential that comes when we tend the field, when we balance and serve the circle. So that's ego adulthood. Now, the self is the presence, the conscious presence that transcends the ego. It doesn't have language. Right? It doesn't do anything. It doesn't think anything. But it is a self. It is a field that connects us with all things. And it serves the adult in remembering the circle. Right? Because the adolescent and the child are separate. They're self-centered, which is why they're very often disconnected with the self, particularly the traumatized child, the traumatized adolescent. Right? But the self is that transcendent awareness of being that is bigger than language, that is bigger than action, that is bigger than form, that is bigger than boundaries, that's bigger than any particular thing. The self is an ecstatic state in many cases because it transcends all the static, right? All the static, all the stasis, all the known. Ecstasy is that which is outside of the known. So the self transcends the known, the stasis, the lines, the language, the shape. It is a presence of being that is connected to all things. And it's a sense of self. It's bigger than the ego. And it is accessible when we find balance. Right? When we are terrified, there's so many fearful thoughts running that we can't open to the awareness that transcends fear. When we're in survival trauma and fear, we are focused so deeply on the part that is connected and at war with everything that we don't feel the innate connection of all things. Because we need to focus on getting the ego through the night, through the day, to survive. We need to focus on our separation in order to compete, to fight, to survive the interaction. when we do that well, and we have a sense of abundance that comes from a competent ego adult, that's when the trauma lifts, that's when the urgency lifts, and we become profoundly aware of self and of the interconnection of all things. And so this is the adult face of consciousness, is the self. And it's adult because it strengthens our awareness of our interconnectivity, which strengthens our love for what is, for the earth, for everything that we are a part of, because the self is the one that is most connected with the truth, with the reality that we are all one. So when the ego self, the competent part, remembers, opens up to the awareness that the ego is a dot in the larger field, that the survival of the species is innately connected with the survival of the ego, that the survival of the planet is innately connected with the survival of the species, that the survival of the solar system is connected to the survival of the planet. When we understand that we are an illusionary dot in the wave of reality, in the field of reality, it supports the maturity of the competent ego to act in such a way that reminds me of the philosophy of many of the Native American tribes, which was to understand that when they kill the buffalo, they eat their brother, and to honor the sacredness of that cycle, of that circle, of that sacrifice, of that sacred dance, that the one becomes the other, that I become you, that you become me. And so you take with reverence from another part of your own body to feed this part of your body. But you don't waste, right? The buffalo were not slaughtered from trains with machine guns or killed for a tongue. There was great sacredness. There was a seriousness in understanding that cycle. And so this is coming from a strong sense of self, the field of interconnectivity that supports a competent, mature, adult ego I in making good use of everything that we consume, that we take for our own growth and well-being.